former UN weapons inspector and incredibly informed individual, Scott Ritter. Oh, hold on a second. There we go. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Lee, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
We've been seeing so much going on. Oh, actually, before I get into that, I have to say I caught one of your articles and your live streams where you were in many ways rightfully yelling, "Where are the Jews, American Jews against genocide? Why are we leaving it to you?" And I've been out here every day, man. I'm here every day. I'm doing the best I can. So. So yes, there are some of us. Jewish Voice for Peace, obviously doing amazing work as well. But I got your point, though. There should be many more Jews across America standing up against this genocide. But I wanted to get into what just happened a few days ago. Iran strikes back against Israel after Israel blows up their consulate, killing many of their people. And if you listen to the American take on this and the Western take on this, it is, oh, wow, Iran lost. They couldn't get through the weapons shield for the most part, 99% shot down. And so, wow, look at what a big win for Israel. And in many ways, it's exactly the opposite. Can you explain why?
Certainly. First of all, we need to understand that Israel and the United States have for some time now been collaborating on building a ballistic missile defense system for Israel, not just to withstand the short-range rockets from Hamas and to a lesser extent Hezbollah. It was basically because of what happened in 2006 when Hezbollah, during that short August war with Israel, pounded Israel nonstop with rockets, and Israel had no defense. Since that time, Hezbollah's upgraded its arsenal with the assistance of Iran and its own indigenous capabilities, so that they now possess longer range missiles with very accurate warheads. And so Israel and the United States have been building this ballistic missile defense structure, but it's not even geared to Hamas and Hezbollah. It's specifically for Iran. It's specifically to counter the Iranian medium-range ballistic missile threat. The United States has deployed some of its most advanced technology, both in terms of an X-band radar they have stationed at an airfield in southern Negev Desert, Nevatim, one of the targets, by the way, of the Iranian attack. But also we plug it into our National Ballistic Missile Defense Organization architecture, satellites that are overhead, other resources in the region, all plug in to provide this surveillance capability, so we can detect a launch immediately and then track the launch as it moves towards Israel, and then transfer that data to missile defense interceptors, who then can intercept with great accuracy whatever threat comes in. We tie it also in with our ships. The Aegis capable destroyers and cruisers we have are part of our national ballistic missile defense architecture, and even during this crisis, we brought two of them in. And plug them into this architecture to add their considerable capabilities. And on top of this, we layer Israeli Arrow 2, Arrow 3, David Sling, improved Patriot. Literally, the two airfields in southern Negev, Nevatim and Ramona, are some of the most heavily protected spots on the planet when it comes to ballistic missile defense. I want to say that one more time. The most heavily protected spots on the planet when it comes to ballistic missile defense. Long story short, Iran reached out and touched each one of them at least 5 times, maybe 7 times, maybe more. These places that shouldn't be hit, couldn't be hit, can't be hit, were hit repeatedly by Iran. If Israel and the United States want to call that a win, I don't know how. They spent literally hundreds of billions of dollars building an impenetrable ballistic missile shield, and Iran, not using its best technology, in many cases using older technology, penetrated it. How Iran did this is really up to the Iranians to say. A lot of speculation goes into the role played by the drones that were sent in to start triggering a reaction. Then they followed up with cruise missiles. They got more of a reaction. Then they fired a bunch of older ballistic missiles again to fine tune. And then in the end, they came in with a handful, a couple dozen of their newer model missiles with maneuvering warheads and warheads with built-in decoys. And these warheads cut through the missile defense shield like a hot knife through butter. This is a game-changing event, not only for Israel, because it proves to Israel that Iran can destroy any place in Israel anytime it wants to. There's no place safe in Israel. The most heavily protected bases in Israel in the world were hit by Iran. And if Iran wanted to have pummeled them with more missiles, they could have. Iran was simply sending a message. It's like Mike Tyson meeting me in the boxing ring and just taking his glove and lightly tapping my nose to remind me that anytime he wanted to, he could pummel me into the dirt. That's what Iran did. They just reached out and they just lightly tapped Israel's nose and said, gotcha. This changes the deterrence posture in the Middle East. Prior to this, Israel was operating under the assumption that it could get away with literal murder, that it could do anything it wanted, anytime it wanted, and everybody was afraid to strike Israel because A, Israel had this impenetrable defense shield that could shoot down any missile sent at, and B, Israel would pound you, would be Mike Tyson pummeling you into the mat. That's over now. Iran has changed that. They flipped the script. It's Iran now who has deterrent superiority. They're the ones who've told the Israelis, if you dare touch us again in any way, nationally, regionally, we now have proven that we can come in and we can hit you. But the thing as an American we have to realize is the same technology that failed the Israelis is at the heart of our own ballistic missile defense shields that we have deployed to Europe and to Asia. We've told our European allies that we can protect you from ballistic missile threats. We've told Japan and South Korea that we can protect you from North Korean missile threats. We've told Taiwan that we can protect you from Chinese missile threats. And Iran just proved that all to be a lie. Nobody's safe in the world anymore, especially if you're relying on American ballistic missile defense, because as we learned in the 1960s and 70s, there is no defense to ballistic missiles. This is why we signed the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty in 1972, because back then we came to the realization that all you're doing is wasting money and making the world a more dangerous place. If you simply acknowledge that everybody's going to be equally vulnerable to these ballistic missiles, so why build a missile defense place? Everybody knows if we use missiles, we all die. So maybe we'll come up with policies that deviate away from using missiles, promoting peace and arms control. That used to be a thing. Now we operate as if we lie to ourselves and say we're protected by ballistic missiles or defenses, and therefore we can be more aggressive with other nations who don't have this level of protection. Iran just showed to the world, not just to Israel, to the world, that entire posture is a lie.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you talk a little more about why the U.S. is so opposed to war with Iran? There are some bloodthirsty right wingers who, say, "Oh, just bomb Iran. We could defeat them easily." But I've heard you make some great points about the Strait of Hormuz, et cetera. Can you talk about that?
Well, there's a number of reasons why we don't want to go to war with Iran. First of all, let's put ourselves in the shoes of those right-wing neocons for a second. Those people who fantasize about war, most of whom probably have never been to war. I have been to war. The war I was in was Operation Desert Storm. I want to remind people that we deployed 750,000 American troops from around the world and projected that power into the Persian Gulf, where we were able to defeat the Iraqi army, the world's fourth largest army, combat-hardened army. We defeated them in short order. From a military perspective, it's undeniable. America showed that it had unmatchable military power. But I want to remind people that those 750,000 troops just didn't get there by magic. They were sent there by ships. And those ships offloaded in ports that provided a permissive environment, meaning that they wanted us to be there. They had stevedores and other port workers, longshoremen helping us get our stuff offloaded the ships. Nobody was bombing us while we were coming in. Nobody was attacking us on our way to that port. We landed at airports, again, friendly airports, where we were received. Troops calmly got off the airplanes to assembly areas, etc. If we tried that today against Iran, first of all, every ship that would be sent in would be attacked as it approached the Persian Gulf by missiles, which Iran has now shown can defeat our ballistic missile defense system. So any ship that tried to make it to Iran would have to run the gauntlet of fire and probably be sunk. But even if they got to a port, that port facility wouldn't be functioning because Iranian missiles would have destroyed that port. If we tried to land at an airport, that airport wouldn't be functioning because the Iranian missiles would have destroyed that airport. So now we have to turn our attention to landing directly in Iran. That means we have to seize a port, seize an airport. That's a frontal assault. That requires a lot of troops that we don't have anymore. And even then, as we move them in, they'll be shot down, they'll be sunk. We can't get that power projected. So anybody who thinks that America is entering this as if we were back in 1990, 1991, you're wrong. We don't have that capability anymore. So now what we do have is we have limited power projected forward in a number of bases in the region. These bases are not well protected. They don't have anywhere near the sophistication of air defense or ballistic missile defense that Israel had. These are sitting ducks for Iranian ballistic missiles. Now, we always viewed the Iranian threat as theoretical. But after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranians launched an attack against Al Assad Air Base in Iraq, where the drones that killed Qasem Soleimani came from. They struck it with at least 10, maybe more, ballistic missiles. And when we did the battle damage assessment afterwards, what we realized is A, we couldn't shoot them down. Couldn't. B, they hit everything they were aiming at with great accuracy. And C, they packed a hell of a punch, meaning that if the Iranians had wanted to, they could have put these missiles on places that had people in them and killed a lot of Americans. But they purposely avoided that. But they sent the signal that if you do this again, we will take out every base in the region, and we have the resources to do it. And the United States went, they do actually, and there's nothing we can do about it. To give you an example of how that played out, Iran shot down a Global Hawk drone afterwards and shot it down over the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump, who's then the president, said, I want to retaliate by bombing the missile sites that shot the Global Hawk down. And the Pentagon was preparing plans. But as they were briefing the president, someone said, well, the consequences for this are going to be very dire. And he said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, we're going to bomb these sites. And then Iran's going to retaliate by taking out all of our airfields. Well, can't we stop that? No, Mr. President, we can't stop that. But then we'll hit Iran with cruise missiles. Yes, Mr. President, we'll do that. But then they're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Well, what does that mean? That means that no oil flows out of there. And with no oil flows, the global economy goes crazy. Oil prices go up. Not a good look. Okay, but we can force the strait open. The Navy tells me we can keep it open. No, we can't. Not without major effort, major projection of force. In order to get that force in there, it would take many months to assemble it. And we're talking about fighting a war that's going to last a year or more, and we may not win. There's no guarantee of outcome. Furthermore, we'll hit their oil facilities, and we'll sanction them and blow up their oil facilities. Yes, Mr. President, but then they're going to blow up Saudi oil fields, Kuwaiti oil fields, United Arab. All the oil fields in the region will be blown up. And then we have a global energy crisis from which there is no recovery. And the American people will forever hate you because oil prices will go through the roof. Gas prices will. There will be no diesel in America. The trucks won't run. You remember that longshore crisis we had out of Long Beach, California, where all the containers were stacked up because we couldn't get enough trucks to move them out. And so Walmart shelves were empty across the country. That will be America forever. We all live in these little suburbs where we all go to the same, Hannaford's or Price Choppers or Safeways, and we expect the same thing. Meat shelves full of meat, vegetables, everything there. It's America. Well, that only happens because people who drive trucks deliver this stuff to those stores on a regular basis. But if the price of diesel goes through the roof, or we don't have diesel, the trucks can't run, we don't have goods, and America dies. So fortunately, somebody was able to tell the president that that's what would happen if he bombed the Iranian air defense site, and he backed out. He came up with a story about, I didn't want to kill lots of Iranians, I'm a humanitarian and all that.
Yeah, right.
But the reality is he probably had to change his underwear after he received the briefing because the reality is quite harsh. Joe Biden doesn't need that briefing. He knows it. He knows the truth. That's why he's saying we're not going to participate in any action against Iran, because the moment we do that, every single base in the region will be saturated with Iranian missiles, and they're going to kill a lot of Americans and destroy a lot of equipment. And there's nothing we can do to defend ourselves. Our air defense systems simply don't work. So this is why the United States has been holding back on that. And I do think we need to emphasize that point, that it's not just a military equation right now. It's an economic equation that's based on energy security. And I will remind Americans at this point in time that Joe Biden, in a political move to make you happy last year, dumped oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's supposed to be for emergency use only, but he released it for political purposes to keep prices down so people would be happy. We're down to less than 17 days worth of oil reserves right now. So if we did get in a war in the Middle East, you don't have the petroleum reserve to save you. 17 days later, we run out of petroleum, and there's no recovering from that. It just is. And if they start blowing up oil fields in the Middle East, there literally is no recovery, because even if peace breaks out all over, you're not going to get that oil production back up anytime soon, if ever. I don't want to get into the technicalities of maintaining, but if you don't maintain the pressure in the oil fields, if you allow water to seep in, et cetera, you ruin the whole thing. And that's what's going to happen. And there will be no oil, and we'll all live very miserable lives.
And it'd be a big boon to Russian oil, probably.
Yeah, well, the Russians, the Russians aren't going to suffer. Let me just put it that way. The Russians won't suffer, and the people they sell oil to won't suffer. But, Russia can't save the world. I mean, even if Russia wanted to, even if Russia said, okay, we're here to help you, we don't like seeing people suffer. I've been to Russia many times. I'm going to tell you right now, the Russians do not get any glee out of watching people suffer. They would actually say, what can we do to help? How can we help? But you can't help. You can't help when there's something. If you have 1,000 people who drink a liter of water a day, and all you have is 500 liters, the best you can say is that we're going to cut it down to a half a liter. But if that's not sustainable of life, you give a liter to the people you're closest to, and the rest of the people pound sand. And that's the reality. So we need to think a whole lot about what we're trying to accomplish in the Middle East, and are we doing it the wisest way possible?
So speaking of Russia, you've been one of the most important voices on the ongoing situation in Ukraine. And, we hear from the U.S. propaganda machine that Ukraine was doing so great for the past year and a half, 2 years. And now even Washington Post is talking about Russian troops advancing to Kiev, and that Ukraine is running low on air defenses. So can you say what you're seeing there and what you think could happen in the next few months?
Sure. Well, this is the culmination of what I've been saying for a long time now. That we talk basic military math, correlation of forces. The Ukrainians, just to keep it simple, they burn through resources. And when I say resources, I'm talking about men. That means dead men, just so you know. Equipment, destroyed equipment. They're burning through resources quicker than these resources can be replenished. And so every day that goes by, Ukraine gets weaker. Russia, on the other hand, is accumulating resources quicker than Ukraine can burn them through. So every day that goes by, Russia gets stronger. And then you add to that, that's not just a quantitative aspect, the qualitative aspect comes in too. The Russians have very good equipment, and they have lots of it. Ukrainians have some good equipment, but not much of it. Some of that equipment was holding the Russians at bay. Air defense systems helped keep Russian air power from being, committed in a decisive manner. But the Ukrainians now are out of air defense systems. So the Russians are having sort of a field day right now, dropping these guided bombs wherever they want to drop them. And these things are deadly accurate. They're killing, the number of Ukrainians that are dying a day is around 1,000, 1,500. The Russian casualties in a day can be counted at less than 100. But the Russians are recruiting 1,500 men a day to fill. So every day is Russia is getting a 1,400 man, addition to their force. The Ukrainians are losing 1,500 guys, and they're getting 200 guys to replace them. So the Ukrainians are getting weaker by leaps and bounds.
And that's also why they're calling 60-year-olds in to fight.
Right. Well, they just passed a law to call in 20-year-olds, but here we come up with an interesting fact about Ukraine. The unique demographics of the situation that Ukraine finds itself in from a historical standpoint is that at this point in time, the Ukrainian demographics, even before the war started, the ideal combatant age group, 20 to 24, there's the lowest number ever. If you look at the population, they have a large number of, let me get my hand up here. I'll go this way. Babies here, but then it drops down to the 24-year-olds and then comes back up to the older people. There's this dip here. So even though they passed a law that says draft all the 20 to 24-year-olds, there's none of them left. They're either all dead or they fled the country. There's nobody left. The Ukrainians are left dragging 50, 60-year-old men off the streets. And to give you another example, and this comes straight from the mouth of Arestovich, the former advisor to Zelensky. And he said, he's reading about how in Russia today, men in their 40s are flocking to hospitals. And you'd say, well, they're looking for exemptions. They don't want to be caught up in this war. No, they're going to the hospital because the military won't take them because they have a chronic medical condition. These men are spending their own money to get these chronic medical conditions reversed, fixed, so they can go to the recruiter and sign up for this war. Why? Because they're not to make money. These guys are all gainfully employed. They're going to make more money being civilians than they do being this. They're doing this because this war is seen by every Russian as their patriotic duty. This is the big war for them. This is the defeat of not just Nazi ideology in Ukraine, but they view this war as the collective West against them, a war of their existential survival. So men who would otherwise stay at home, take care of their families are saying, you have to go to war. You remember that movie Patton?
Yeah.
And Scott playing the role up there. Oh, what did you do in the war, Granddaddy? Well, you don't want to tell them you were shoveling poop in Louisiana. And that's the thing. All these 40-year-old men sitting there going, I ain't going to be telling my kids I was shoveling poop in Moscow. I want to tell them I was on the front line doing my duty. And so these guys, the Russians, are desperate to be part of this because this is their moment in history. This is their fight. And so when they go there, they're fighting for a cause they believe in. Now imagine yourself being a Ukrainian who's trying to run away. You get thumped on the head, thrown into a van, sent to a training camp where they don't trust you enough to actually let you handle the ammunition and the gun too much. And then they throw you in the front line with no training, no leadership, nothing. They just throw you out, surrounded by guys who think the same way. None of you want to be there. And you're going up against the Russians, whose sole purpose right now is to close with and destroy you through firepower and maneuver. And they have a lot of firepower. They know how to maneuver, and they really want to do this thing. This is a one-sided fight. It's tragic, actually, because it could have been avoided, but it's happening. It's real, and Russia's winning.
Yeah, absolutely could have been avoided. I was shocked. I don't know if you were, that the New York Times a few months ago admitted that the CIA had bases, or at least facilities, in the forest on the border of Russia as early as 2014. I think probably earlier, but they admitted at least 2014. And yet this was so-called unprovoked, right?
Yeah, no, but it's not just that. I mean, you dig into what the CIA was doing. I mean, there's standard espionage. I hate to tell everybody about it, but spying is the second oldest profession in the world after the first oldest, which is prostitution. And spies make use of prostitutes to corrupt individuals for recruitment. So they're closely linked. So
yeah,
actually, I don't want to link them too close because it's an insult to prostitutes but the CIA, I'm sorry, the CIA, they've admitted, for instance, because now we know what kind of CIA people were there, at least after, in the lead up to this war. They're from the Special Activities Center, from Ground Branch. These are paramilitary guys who trained the Ukrainians in terrorism. So when the Russians are saying, hey, we see the hand of the West in the Crocus City Hall terror attack, the Russians aren't making this up. The Russians know exactly what happened. They know who funded it. They know who trained them. The American people are asleep at the wheel. Your audience does understand that the Russians have the most capable, efficient nuclear arsenal in the world today. It outclasses ours by orders of magnitude. They're more accurate, they're faster, they're more reliable, they're newer, they're more survivable. And the Russians are serious about their doctrine that says if you threaten us with nuclear weapons or you threaten us, our existential survival, we will use these nuclear. Russia's not a joke. this concept of Russians are a bunch of drunk guys who go out and wrestle with bears in the woods. I mean, they may wrestle with bears in the woods, but and they may get drunk, but they're more than that. This is a real nation full of real people that has a real purpose, and they're very serious. We need to treat them as serious. How would we feel? Well, I'll ask this question too. Do you remember that intelligence report back when we were in Afghanistan, the war that we would never leave because we were there for the end? We're there for you, buddies. We're there for the Afghan people. We're there for the Afghan women. We will never abandon you. Bam, we're gone. Like you never. That war. Do you remember the report? The Russians were paying the Taliban bounties to kill American soldiers.
Yeah.
And then dug into it. You found out that it revolved around 3 dead American soldiers and one dead American, one too many. 3 dead Americans that we were accusing the Russians of paying a bounty to the Taliban to kill. It was all a lie. It turned out it was a lie. Never true. But how enraged everybody was. 3 Americans died because the Russians paid the Taliban to kill them. Like you'd have to pay the Taliban to kill Americans, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Now let's look what we're happening today. You got Lindsey Graham and other senators saying that the provision of billions of dollars of aid to the Ukrainians is the best expenditure of money in the world. And then he does this little Lindsey Graham thing. And he says, because for a fraction of our defense budget, we're empowering the Ukrainians to kill lots of Russians, And this is a good thing. I'll just make this point. One day this war is going to end, Lee. And when it ends, we're going to have to sit down at the table with the Russians. And know this, that we'll be sitting down at the table of somebody who lost a family member to this war, lost a father, lost an uncle, and they lost him because the United States enabled the Ukrainians to kill Russians in a losing cause. We knew the Ukrainians were never going to win. We know the Ukrainians didn't start this fight. This was a self-defensive act by the Russians. And yet we, till the bitter end, because we don't care about the Ukrainians. We don't care about them at all. We've sacrificed over 500,000 of their lives. Tens of millions of people are displaced. We've destroyed their country. And we're still saying, do more, do more. And Ukrainians are finally waking up going, wait a minute. All we're doing is dying. Bing, you broke the code. But we don't care about the Ukrainians, and we damn sure don't care about the Russians. But the Russians know who's killing them. They know who's responsible for this. And if we ever want to live in peace and harmony with these people, we're going to have to beg forgiveness for what we've done. Because unlike that fake news story in Afghanistan, we are really paying the Ukrainians to kill Russians.
Well said. Do you have time for one last question? Squeeze in here?
Yep, I'm here as long as you need me, pal.
Okay. Last question. And I can't think of anyone better to speak on this than you. I covered this, and there's been some reports about how the U.S. is readying a transnational kill chain for the Taiwan proxy war. They just approved the dangerous sale of the Link 16 communication system to Taiwan. Can you talk about what exactly a transnational kill chain is and why the U.S. seems to be both pushing for this proxy war with China and at the same time trying to ease tensions with China because we kind of need them for everything?
Lee, I apologize. I don't know what a transnational kill chain is. I might know it by another name.
Yeah, I think you probably would. It's a communication system that basically aligns everything. Key system in the U.S. military communications, jam-resistant tactical data network for coordinating NATO weapon systems.
Yeah.
So you probably just know a different name. Yeah.
Look, here's the flaw. The United States, and this came up when we, recently you saw a different aspect of this. When, do you remember there was panic a little while ago about the Russians putting nuclear weapons in space?
Yeah.
Now, oh my God, the Russians are getting ready to put nuclear weapons in space. But nobody ever asked the question, why would the Russians want to do that? And they said, well, EMP, electromagnetic impulse. And people were like, well, but why? Why would the Russians want to do that? The answer is that we are now employing this architecture, this satellite-based. You know what the Starlink is? Is that what's called? The one that Elon Musk put up there.
Starlink. Yeah.
So basically, you get a Falcon 9 aircraft, goes up, and it just deposits a whole bunch of small satellites, and they go in, they create this galaxy around the planet for instantaneous communication. Well, the US military has been doing that with its own Starlink type satellites, and these provide perfect communications, targeting. Airplanes can talk to airplanes, airplanes can talk to soldiers, ships can talk to everything. It enables what we call, the broad spectrum domain dominance. We dominate everything, and it gives us additional lethality because we can react quicker than the enemy. We're inside their decision-making cycle and things of that nature. So we're plugging the Taiwanese into this so that they can be part of our perfect, kill network. First of all, nothing in the U.S. military works the way it's supposed to work. In fact, it almost always doesn't work, especially when it becomes complicated. It works good in a laboratory environment, but when you expose it to real world things, stresses, and you expose it to the average American service member, whom I respect dearly because I used to be one. But just a little war story. When I was in Russia doing the arms control stuff, we had a $12 million X-ray machine called Cargo Scan that we wanted to deploy 900 miles in the middle of nowhere with no Radio Shack to repair it if it broke. So it had to work all the time. I was brought in to do the final test. My colonel had turned to the lead Sandia engineers, the guys who built it, and he said, "Is this idiot proof?" And they said, "Yes, sir, it's idiot proof." And he said, "But is it marine proof?" And the answer, no. I broke it within 5 minutes. So the point is, even well-meaning people who aren't necessarily morons by nature will break things, because that's what we do in the military. We break things. You give a Marine a bowling ball, he'll break it. And so all this stuff that we're giving the Taiwanese, first of all, it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. It won't work the way it's supposed to. But moreover, all it takes is one EMP pulse in outer space, and the whole thing gets shut down. And here's the thing. When I went in the Marine Corps, I was trained on how to do things the old-fashioned way. We didn't have computers. We had maps, acetate overlays. We had grease pens and all this stuff. If I wanted to communicate with somebody, I did a phone. We had wire lined up. I talked to them. I called in a private. I wrote out what's called a yellow canary, ripped it off, gave it to them. We had runners who would run.
This was 100 years ago, right?
Well, not quite, but it worked. You know what doesn't work? When I open up my computer and boom, and I can't get an internet signal. And now, because I haven't trained to do the other stuff, I'm just sitting there looking at a computer screen, dumber than dirt. Meanwhile, the Russians and the Chinese, who have the same technology, but they also train on doing it the old school way, they're still working, they're still communicating, etc. Taiwan buying into this American full spectrum domain dominance concept is actually committing suicide, literally, because it's like buying into a ballistic missile defense shield. Oh, we're safe. We're safe. And the Iranians go, no, you're not. Touching you on the nose. The Taiwanese now are saying, oh, we're safe because we have perfect communications. Nothing works. A Marine touched it and it broke. So, yeah, that's what's going on here. It's just part of America's, we haven't fought a real enemy in so long that we have this artificial illusion about what war should be. And we've allowed people whose sole function is to make money in the military industrial complex not produce systems that work in combat stress. So they produce this elaborate stuff that looks great on a PowerPoint presentation or a slide, and it looks really good to congressmen because it's money. It's the military industrial congressional complex for a reason. So they like the money that they're spending, taxpayer money in their account. It doesn't work. And that's the reality. Almost nothing in the American military works the way it's supposed to work.
And most of the chips in these weapon systems come from China as well, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the funny thing about Taiwan, because a lot of them come from Taiwan. And so, that's one of the reasons why we have such an interest on Taiwan. But here, again, just because we put people down, we don't want the Chinese to have chips, so we sanction them. So you're not allowed to have a certain level of chip. You can't. And there's I guess, again, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but lithography, I guess, is printing and specific lithographic technology that the Dutch apparently good at, and the sold to the Taiwanese, we don't want the Chinese to have. So we banned them from all that, and we claim that they're going to be stuck in the Stone Ages. That what the equivalent is that every American gets to run around with an iPhone 13, and the Chinese are stuck with the original iPhone 1. And that and we think that the Chinese are going to have to live with that because they are, after all, Chinese, and they're not as smart as we are. You know that because they're Chinese. American people in the world. So the Chinese went, oh, okay, thank you. Let me remind you, America, what happens when you have 1.4 billion people. We can go out and get the smartest people in the world. You only have 340 million Americans. We got 1.4 billion Chinese, all well educated. We bring them together and we put money into it. And guess what happened? They caught up. They didn't just catch up, they bypassed us. So we sanctioned China to stop them from getting the chips. And they turned in on themselves, and they're building better chips. That's just the stupidity of the American approach. I mean, if we just learned how to live together in peace and harmony with people, stop sanctioning people, Chinese might share some of that technological prowess with us so that my iPhone 13 worked better than it does.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that last part. If we just started working together with each other rather than trying to dominate each other, and especially from the U.S. empire standpoint, things would be a lot better. Scott, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. At one point, I showed one of your Substack articles. I highly recommend everybody check that out, scottritterextra.com. And then where else should I send them?
That's it. It's a one-stop shop. So you can go there. There's no paywall. It's all there.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
All right. Thank you, Lee.